And we are a community. We are gun violence survivors, including victims and witnesses, change makers and advocates who come together to work towards a future free from gun violence. And now, Tara Gottlieb, a gun violence survivor, will speak.
Thank you, Rachel. My name is Tara Gottlieb. The drive here to New Haven today is one that is not unfamiliar to me. For the first part of my childhood, my parents, Tim and Kim Donnelly, had a jewelry store just across the way at the Chapel Square Mall. I have fond memories of New Haven, but my God, I wish they were here today. Instead, our story took a turn that none of us could have ever imagined. In 2005, I had just graduated college and moved out of my parents' home in Bridgeport into my first New York City apartment. At work one evening, I got a phone call, followed by many more phone calls. Some were frantic, some were vague, but they all said one thing the same. My parents' jewelry store in Fairfield had been robbed, and I needed to get home, now. As I made my way by car from New York City to Bridgeport Hospital, what followed was a frenzied chaos. More phone calls, more confusion. And as we pulled into the hospital parking lot, I don't think the car had even come to a complete stop when I jumped out and ran to my brother who was standing outside. I asked him what in the world was going on. With his head down and in his gentle way, he simply said, "They're dead, both of them. Mom and Dad are dead." That is our story. But our story is only one of the 100 lives lost every day in this country to gun violence, whether it be daily violence or suicide or mass shootings. Just 2 weeks ago, I sat at a table with friends having lunch who happened to also be gun violence survivors. As we had lunch, the news broke of an active shooter in El Paso. Not only did I relive my own pain, but I witnessed people who are now dear friends of mine relive their own trauma, seeing it on their faces. When someone you love dies by a gun, or you experience a mass shooting, there is no normal for your life to go back to. Just this week, a reporter called me and asked me for my opinion on bulletproof book bags and whether or not I would be buying them for my children. The pit in my stomach when I think about that is the same feeling I had when I got an email letting me know that my daughter's preschool class had successfully completed their lockdown drill. My daughter is 3 years old. She has more practice in lockdown drills than she is at riding a bike. I cannot accept this to be our normalcy. I refuse to raise this generation thinking that they don't deserve better. My children deserve better, your children deserve better, our country deserves better.
Yes. Yes.
I challenge you today, if you haven't been active before, consider today your own call to action. It's going to take all of us. It's not going to happen overnight, but we can't give up. The next time you tell someone you know that has lost someone to gun violence or has endured a shooting, before you tell them you're sorry for their loss or you're sorry for their experience, tell them what you have done. Tell them what you have done to make a difference. And if you struggle to answer that, and if you struggle to do that, then maybe you're not doing enough. Let's change that. It is now a very great honor to introduce my brother, Eric Donnelly of the Alternate Roots. And these are his words of our story. But it's not just our story, it's America's story.
Tara. Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. As Tara alluded to, this song is about a phone call we got about 14 years ago, and we continue to play it for everyone that got that phone call today, and in the hopes that there'll be less and less of these phone calls in the future. Thank you for listening. This is Somewhere in America.
The last thing that my father saw when he was still alive was a gun in the hands of a sick young man with bright blue eyes. A man who looked just like me, as far as anyone else could see. A stranger, not an enemy, and my mother watched it all. That was the last thing that she saw. Somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring, and nothing can prepare you for the news it's gonna bring. And nothing ever changes, just the names and the faces. Somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring. An unlucky break, wrong time, wrong place. I've heard them all so many times. If your dad had had a gun of his own, maybe they'd still be alive. But I still can't believe the resistance, the denial, and the insistence. When something's broken that clearly needs fixing, you can fight to change, or you can fight to stay the same. Somewhere in America, the news is about to break, and nothing can prepare you for the toll it's gonna take. And nothing ever changes, just the dates and the locations. But somewhere in America, the news is about to break. And how long? It's too long before the words you didn't say just speak for you. The years have been kind, Mom. I've got a son now of my own. When I think of what I'll tell him happened to you, I still don't know that this world's a much safer place. That kind of danger you won't ever have to face, and we won't stop until we see that day. What else is there to say? Somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring, and nothing can prepare you for the news it's gonna bring. And nothing ever changes without hope, strength, and patience. Somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring. Somewhere in America.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. At this time, we want to take a moment to recognize all survivors and anyone personally affected by gun violence present today. If you are comfortable, we ask anyone who has been personally affected by gun violence to raise your hand. Thank you. We do this work to prevent anyone else from having to feel the pain you felt. For those who had your hands up, please also notice those who are here supporting you too. We're going to keep fighting, and we're going to make change. And we're only going to get louder and louder until we are heard. Thank you for being here today.
Here we are again at another pivotal moment in our movement. Our hearts are broken, but our determination is unwavering. We in Connecticut are grateful to have gun sense champions like Richard Blumenthal, who will speak soon, and Chris Murphy as our senators. And today, we remind the rest of the Senate that you work for us, not the NRA. While the string of mass shootings has rallied our nation's outcry for action, the senseless epidemic of gun violence that kills 100 people in America every day and twice as many wounded have effects that extend far beyond the direct casualties. Gun violence shapes and ripples through the lives of millions more Americans, through all of us who witness it, know someone who was shot, or live in the fear of the next shooting. A motorcycle backfires in Times Square. You hear firecrackers in your own town. Why should we be living in fear? Here in Connecticut, gun violence impacts all communities. Gun suicides account for 61% of our gun deaths, and homicides account for 37%, most of the rest of gun deaths, disproportionately affecting communities of color. And domestic violence with guns is a lethal combination. The presence of guns in homes increases the risk of death by 5 times for American women. As a community, we're here to say enough. We demand the Senate take action on gun violence in every form, and we know this can be done. You're going to hear today how background checks and red flag laws are effective and must be enacted at the national level. Fix this patchwork of gun laws state by state. We need these national laws, and they are a critical first step. Each of our speakers will now briefly share their unique perspective and the actions they're taking in support of this movement, or that they will take in the fall after the recess. First, we'll hear from U.S. Senator Richard Blumenthal.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you all for being here on a beautiful August day. Are we going to make change in America? Are we going to make change in America? I want to hear that so that all of America can hear. Are we going to make change in America? Make no mistake. Make no mistake, Connecticut and America, you are making change. You are crumbling the gun lobby. The NRA is imploding, and we are breaking the vice-like grip of the so-called spokespeople for gun owners, because America is saying enough is enough, not one more. So I want to speak for a moment. I want to speak for a moment from the heart, not from the shoulder. Rotator cuff surgery is routine when it's done to somebody else. From the heart, I want to say today, I woke up angry. But I'm angrier now because I've just come from Yale New Haven Hospital, where I was visiting Captain Anthony Duff. Most of you know his story. A dedicated career police officer, one of our finest, who jumped out of a car barely a week ago in the middle of the night because he saw ongoing a shooting at Fountain and Dixwell, about a 10-minute walk from here. Anthony Duff jumped out of his car and chased the shooter, who then shot him 3 times. In the arm, in the chest, in the pelvis, and brought him near to death. That same night, the victim of the shooting died here in New Haven on our streets. Captain Anthony Duff is a hero, and he's going to be fine. He's brave, he's tough, a great guy with a great family. But that victim on the streets is just one of 90 that day. It isn't only the mass shootings, it is one by one, the suicides, the domestic assaults, the intimate partners who are killed, the estranged spouses who kill their kids or try, as well as the women in their household. This is not America. And I want to say to Mitch McConnell, come back and do your job. Bring back the United States Senate. All we need to do is pass the bill that Joe Courtney and Rosa DeLauro and our delegation voted for in the House, and that we are sponsoring in the Senate. Universal background check. Keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, like that shooter at Fountain and Henry. And the gun that he used, 40mm Glock, was equipped with an extended magazine. Let's ban extended magazines and assault weapons that have no purpose but to kill and maim innocent people. And to keep those guns out of the hands of people who threaten to kill people and who do kill people and who are dangerous to themselves or others. Let's have nationwide what we have in Connecticut, a red flag extended risk protection order. Emergency risk protection orders work because they keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. And I'm working on that measure with Lindsey Graham right now. And in the name of Ethan Song, in the name of Ethan Song, who died just miles from here, let's require safe storage of weapons so that kids don't kill each other playing with them. Safe storage is common sense. All these measures are common sense. All we need is for the Republicans in the United States Senate to stand up to the gun lobby. And all we need is Donald Trump to want to keep America great by making America safer. He could come out in favor of these measures, and he could give his Republicans the backbone. We need to send Republicans in the Senate a message. If you don't support common sense measures to stop gun violence, America will give you your walking papers in 2020. So I'm proud to be in Connecticut, where we've taken the lead. I'm proud to be here, but as you've heard already, states like Connecticut with the strongest gun measures are at the mercy of the ones with the weakest. Because guns, guess what, have no respect for state boundaries. They cross those boundaries, the assault weapons, the crime guns, the stolen guns, the lost guns are the ones that are used on the streets of New Haven and Bridgeport, and yes, every community across the country. I'm proud to be from Connecticut, where we have such great leadership, and you're going to hear from some of them right now. But for now, let me just say to every one of you and every one of the groups, Moms Demand Action, you are great. Connecticut Against Gun Violence, Everytown for Gun Safety, Newtown Action Alliance, Sandy Hook Promise, Brady Giffords. We are creating a movement. We are going to win this fight because enough is enough. Not one more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Blumenthal. Now we're going to hear from U.S. Congressman Joe Courtney.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you to the Connecticut Moms Demands Action, making us part of this nationwide movement that's happening over this weekend to, again, very focused and laser-like, get the message out to the U.S. Senate that the House has acted. There are 3 bills that are in Mitch McConnell's inbox. H.R. 8, which is the bipartisan background check, which the House passed last February. H.R. 1112, which is the Charleston loophole. Jim Clyburn's bill, which would make sure that FBI background checks have to be fully complete and that firearms are not given to people arbitrarily after 72 hours, which is exactly what happened in South Carolina when those people going to worship were slaughtered by an individual who was, again, because of that loophole, given dangerous guns, which, again, destroyed a community and a church in one fell swoop. And finally, H.R. 1585, which is the Violence Against Women's Act, which the House voted to pass, which would end the boyfriend loophole to make sure that individuals who have been charged and found guilty of domestic violence will not be allowed to go back and have access to their weapons. Mitch McConnell can call the Senate. Mitch McConnell can call the Senate back tonight and take up those bills which have already been voted on. There is nothing in the Constitution that says an August recess can't be interrupted for the business of the people. And again, looking at what just happened in Dayton and El Paso, this country is screaming out for action. And if it inconveniences a few people in the Senate leadership to call the Senate back to act, too bad. What we need to do as a country is to make that change. Now, I just want to say, as a member of the House back in 2016, things didn't move quite as smooth. After the Orlando nightclub, some of you may recall, we had a sit-in in the well of the House led by one of the great heroes of modern times, John Lewis, to protest the fact that Paul Ryan would not bring a background check bill to the floor. And for 24 hours, we locked up the floor of the House, but still was met by deaf ears in terms of taking any action. Well, something happened between 2016 and today in the House of Representatives. Last November, in the United States of America, we had the largest voter turnout for a midterm election since 1914. And because of that turnout, we elected a new majority in the House of Representatives with a 10 million vote plurality. And we won seats in places like Southern Virginia and Northern Michigan and Oklahoma with new members who, when the time came to vote on that agenda, which I just recited for you, again, the conventional wisdom was you can't vote for those kinds of bills if you come from those kinds of districts. And again, the voters, the external pressures, the Moms Demand Actions all across America, they blew up that conventional wisdom, and those new members lined up to vote for Americans all across the country who have had enough. So the external pressure of the ballot box, the external pressure of rallies, the external pressure of people coming to Washington and making Hill visits, it has worked in the House of Representatives. It's time now to finish the job. in the U.S. Senate and in the White House. Keep up the great work, and we're going to make real change, and we're going to get across the finish line. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Congressman Courtney.
Vote them out! 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 Vote them out!
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Lieutenant Governor Susan Bysowitz.
Good afternoon, Moms Demand Action. Good afternoon, CAGV, and all the groups that are standing with us in solidarity. I have a message for Senator Mitch McConnell and for our president. And Senator McConnell, Mr. President, see us here right now. We are thousands of Moms Demand Action members here in Connecticut. We are more than 6 million strong across the country, and that is way more than the NRA. See us here. See what we did in Connecticut. We not only changed Congress, but we changed the face of our state legislature. We had gridlock in the state Senate going into 2018, where I have the great privilege of presiding now. We increased members that support gun safety in both houses. We passed 3 gun safety bills in our state legislature. We are leading the way, and you all did it. You did it by supporting candidates who support this critical issue. You made a difference. Mr. President, Senator McConnell, see us, see what we did and what we can do. And hear us. We have a simple message. Take action. Put the bill on the desk, Senator McConnell. Mr. President, use the power of your office, the most powerful in the world, to get the bill on the Senate desk. And hey, by the way, add one more. Ban assault weapons in our country. And Mr. President and Senator McConnell, a bit of friendly advice. Fight like a girl. Fight like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. Prime Minister Ardern put a bill on her legislature's desk after a massacre, and New Zealand banned assault weapons. Fight like a girl, Mr. President. So, today's August 18th, and 100 years ago, there was a bill passed that gave women the right to vote, and in every election from 1920 forward, women have been making a difference in national elections. And by the way, we got one coming up in 2020. So, your voice is your vote. Use your vote. Use your advocacy. You've shown the power. We can make a difference because our lives, our children's lives depend on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Susan, Lieutenant Governor Bysowitz. And may I add, fight like a mother. All right. Next, we'll hear from State Representative Steve Staffstrom. Steve?
Thank you all for being here. You know, it can't be said enough times. 2018 was a turning point here in the state of Connecticut again. It was a time in which Moms Demand Action, CAGV, and others stood up and said, you know what, the issue we care about the most at the ballot boxes is a matter of life and death. It's a matter of gun safety here in the state of Connecticut and across the nation. You coming out, voting in the numbers that folks voted for in 2018, did a couple of things. First, it allowed myself and my co-chair, Senator Gary Winfield from here in New Haven, to take the gavel of the Judiciary Committee in our state legislature with a good margin, with a margin of Democratic support. But it also sent a message to those Republicans on that committee and in the legislature more broadly, that if you don't get on board with gun safety measures, if you don't get on board with common sense gun regulations, you're next. You'll be the next one voted out come 2020. You all did that. As much as Gary and I got to stand up there and with our colleagues on the House floor and pass not one, not two, but for the first time in our state's history, 3 gun safety measures this year, it was because of you. It was your back, it was your voice, it was your shirts in the Capitol, and it was the noise you all made at the ballot box to every member of our state legislature that they better get on board or get out of the way. And Connecticut has shown the way. Connecticut has shown the way for Congress and the rest of the states around this nation that we can pass common sense gun legislation on a bipartisan basis. We were the state that decades ago, passed a red flag law that has saved hundreds, if not thousands of lives in our state already. We were the state that a couple years ago on a bipartisan basis with the advocates here as well as advocates on the domestic violence front passed a temporary restraining order bill that said if you're charged with a domestic violence offense, you've got 48 hours to turn in your firearm. We were the state that said solid, severe background checks have to be performed before you can own a dangerous weapon. And as Senator Blumenthal alluded to, this year, we led the nation in passing the strongest safe storage measures in our country. Not just in the home, not just locking up your firearm in your house when there's kids there, but don't leave it on the front seat of your car when you walk into the store either. And finally, we passed a comprehensive measure to ban ghost guns and 3D printed guns. I'm looking around and I recall the look on a lot of your faces 2 years ago when that bill died on the House calendar and said, how come? And we said, because there was too many people who said this isn't necessary. This isn't needed now. This isn't a problem. Ghost guns aren't on our streets. And we heard throughout this year police chiefs come forward here in New Haven and certainly in my hometown of Bridgeport come forward and say, yeah, they are. We're finding them on our streets. We're pulling them off. We've read news reports here in our state where they've been confiscated. And guess what? One was used recently in Dayton. And if Ohio had the law that Connecticut had, who knows? Maybe that Dayton shooting wouldn't have happened because someone wouldn't have been able to go on the internet, buy the pieces of a gun, put it together in their own basement without having it serialized and without passing a background check. It's common sense, and you've all done that.
Thank you so much. Representative Steve Stafford. And now I'd like to introduce the Mayor of New Haven, Tony Harp.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everybody. When moms put their foot down, things happen. Thank you, moms. You know, New Haven, unfortunately, has the distinction of having 2/3 of this town covered by ShotSpotter. And why is that? Because so many guns are fired that people stop calling the police. And so we have to have technology that calls the police for us so that the police can get to the scene in time. It's time for guns to stop coming into Connecticut from out of state. We do have the strongest gun laws in the country, but the guns come here anyway. And they come here because other states have weak gun laws. People can buy guns legally elsewhere, bring them into Connecticut, sell them to our children, and havoc happens. But mothers across this country can put their foot down and make the NRA and those who listen to them listen up, because our children matter. They are our future. We have the unenviable distinction of having mothers come together and say our children ought to be recognized. We ought to have a memorial on their behalf. And so we are creating a memorial for the children who've been lost to gun violence here in New Haven. And when we started collecting the names, you would be as sad as I am to find out that we have over 600 children who've lost their lives to gun violence since 1987. Something has got to be done about gun violence in this country. We've done what we can in Connecticut more than any, but it is a national problem, and it is time for our Republican Senate to listen up and to listen to mothers and make sure that they care that children are losing their lives every single day in our country. What kind of country lets our children die on the streets? Mothers demand action will assure that they hear that this is something that we don't want to be our legacy. So keep up the good work, and let's rattle Washington until they open the doors of the Senate. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mayor Hart. Ooh, that's a hard one to follow, but I'm going to read a statement now by U.S. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, who couldn't be here today, but she sent her these remarks. As we mourn those lost in the most recent mass shootings, we must recognize that unspeakable gun violence is continuing to occur in our communities at an alarming frequency. These were clear acts of domestic terrorism meant to inflict fear and division. In El Paso specifically, the shooter was driven by white nationalism and hatred of immigrants, both of which have undeniably been enabled by the president. The House has passed gun violence prevention legislation to keep guns out of the wrong hands. We have also taken action in my appropriations subcommittee to fund gun violence prevention research in order to address this public health crisis. Since 1968, more Americans have died by gun violence than every American war combined. Yet, our government has refused to dedicate any funding to figure out why for more than 20 years. Senate Majority Leader McConnell has refused to take any action whatsoever. He should call the Senate back into session immediately. He and the President must act and work with Democrats to solve this problem. These gun violence prevention measures would help save lives, and they are supported by the vast majority of Americans. Republicans in Congress and the White House cannot continue to do nothing. We must levy public pressure on these officials to take up legislation that is waiting, and we must ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. We have lost far too many lives to gun violence, and continued inaction dishonors all who have died. We have a moral responsibility to act now. That was Rosa DeLauro's remarks. All right. I'm realizing one of the skills of being a politician is not sweating, which I'm not doing very well. Anyway, our next speaker is from Project Longevity, Brent Peterkin. Brent?
Thank you. I want to give a shout out to Moms Demand Action for their leadership. I want to give a shout out to Everytown. I want to give a shout out to Connecticut Against Gun Violence. I want to give a shout out to the Giffords Law Center. for their leadership. I also want to give a shout out to our federal, state, and local elected officials for their leadership. We need courage. We need change. We need weak legislators to step up to the plate to fight against weak gun laws. We also need to come together and fight against white supremacy. Senator Blumenthal mentioned the Honorable Captain Duff, who was injured in gunfire recently, and also the loss of life of Tony Clark, who was murdered in New Haven. That kind of gun violence is what's experienced on a regular basis in black and brown communities. We also saw recently the gun violence that occurred in Philadelphia, where there was hours-long standoff with 6 officers being wounded in the line of duty. That's the kind of gun violence that black and brown communities experience far too often. Now, there are strategies in place. There are group violence intervention strategies, there's street outreach organizations, there's organizations that work on prisoner or inmate reentry to make sure that these individuals don't fall back into the ways in which they came from after being released from prison. There are police departments who are progressive and have demonstrated leadership with community policing efforts. But that's not enough. What we also need to do is to ensure that we have universal background checks to make sure that guns aren't finding their ways into our neighborhoods. We need to make sure that we're passing red flag laws, closing private sale loopholes, supporting safe storage laws like we did here in the state of Connecticut. Shout out to the family of Ethan Song. We also need to make sure that we support Rosa DeLauro and her colleagues in Congress to push for CDC and NIH funding. We need to make sure that the impact that this is having on the lives in our communities across this country is constantly being revisited and shoved in the face of those who turn their back on suffering of others. There's a lot more work to do. We suffer from a poverty of courage. We suffer from a poverty of empathy. And we're falling into a deeper and deeper state of apathy. But today we tap into a well of inspiration. Yesterday I tapped into a well of inspiration in Bridgeport. There's a new organization that was formed called Mothers Taking Charge, where mothers from the city of Bridgeport who've lost a son to gun violence, who have sons and daughters who are in the midst of issues and conflicts that will bring violence to them, have taken it upon themselves to organize with the support of with the support of Moms Demand Action, to serve as local activists and also advocates to ensure that Connecticut remains strong in its position against gun violence. You being here today is inspiring. And others like you all across this country is inspiring. Keep hope alive, keep the fight going, hold people accountable, push for more aggressive legislation, bring others to the table, bring gun owners to the table. The NRA does not support them. What they do support is Ray LaPierre's private interests. Right? As he enriches himself off their donations. That organization has a cancer that's grown within. Let's make sure we don't have that cancer grown within our coalition. Let's remain strong and focus on solidarity and unity and fight together.
Thank you so much. If you haven't heard of Project Longevity, check them out online. They do the hard work on the ground, reducing city gun violence in our cities in Connecticut. And now, we have 2 more speakers, important speakers. We have Brendan Wright from Gays Against Guns.
Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by thanking Moms Demand Action for inviting me here today to join in on their New Haven Recess Rally. I'm proud to be here with all of you today as we continue to raise our collective voices and demand that we be heard regarding the gun violence epidemic in our country. My name is Brendan Wright, and I am here on behalf of Gays Against Guns, founded in the wake of the Pulse nightclub massacre on June 12, 2016. When I think about and consider the impact of gun violence on our country, the overarching association can seem insidious, as we have become all too accustomed to the cycles following each mass shooting, despite their deep and harmful impact on our nation. But when I think about what the word insidious truly means, and the way in which it is related to gun violence and the gun violence epidemic today, the everyday victims who often go unaddressed in media coverage are what ultimately comes to mind. This is the way in which gun violence has had an insidious effect on our culture. This is why it is so important to continue showing up as you have today, to continue taking action, to stand up and say, not one more. With the continued support and advocacy done by all of you here today, we can keep the essential conversation surrounding gun violence and the impact on our local communities going. Strive to not only raise awareness and take action in the wake of mass shootings, but to think about the ways in which we must remain vigilant to work on behalf of the 100 people who die each day in our country as a result of gun violence. I find myself committed to the continued efforts to end gun violence across America for multiple reasons. Given my involvement with Gays Against Guns, of course, Pulse was a large initial factor pushing me towards wanting to make an impact and change. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and I remember waking up the morning after the Pulse massacre, which happened to also be the last day of D.C. Pride that year, and being in a state of shock and disbelief. I remember feeling unsure about whether or not it would be safe to attend the festivities that day, to enter into spaces which were meant to be safe, community-centered, and celebratory. I did decide to attend that day, but there was certainly a strange energy in the space as all of us grappled with the events of the night before. This is just one example, but the message is clear. We cannot allow guns to continue to make our communities feel unsafe. We deserve more. We deserve better. As a member of the LGBTQ community, I further remain committed to advocacy surrounding combating gun violence as a way to further support and raise awareness for the ways in which the intersections of identity and marginalized communities can find themselves at even greater risk of becoming victims of gun violence as a result of the gun culture our country has allowed to flourish. I think about Dana Martin, Jasleen Ware, Ashanti Carmen, Claire Legato, Malaysia Booker, Michelle Tamika Washington, Paris Cameron, Chanel Surlock, Denali Berries Stuckey, Kiki Thantroy, and Jordan Coffer. All of these names are those belonging to trans people, nearly all Black transgender women the media has reported as being killed as a result of gun violence this year alone. When we truly commit ourselves to looking at the everyday impact of gun violence, we cannot forget that we are also fighting for those often marginalized in our society. Finally, I remain committed to being an advocate working towards ending gun violence and the gun violence epidemic because of those in my life who are survivors of gun violence, or those who were survivors who could no longer carry that weight. I think about a former romantic partner who experienced gun violence at a young age and lived with terrible PTSD, who unfortunately in recent years made the decision to take his own life. I think about my friends who are survivors and were made victims of gun violence through intimate partner violence. I think about my friend Deanie, and who lost her daughter, Rochelle Jones, at just 16 years old on South Capitol Street in Washington, D.C. Rochelle should still be alive today. Deanie should still have her daughter today. Yet our nation's obsession with guns has taken Rochelle's life and the lives of so many others away all too soon. So please remember, even after today, do not lose hope. Do not stop fighting. We owe it to Rochelle. We owe it to Deanie. We owe it to our communities who must deal with the often overlooked everyday impact of gun violence to keep showing up, keep making noise, and demanding that change be made and action be taken now. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon Wright.
Not one more! Not one more!
Not one more.
Not one more! Not one more!
A lot of us have mentioned the impact that gun violence takes on our students who go to school each day, wondering if they'll have a lockdown drill or anything worse than that. And now we have Julia Gangemi from Students to Man Action in Guilford, Connecticut.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Julia Gangemi, and I'm one of the Students to Man Action leads in Guilford. I'm 17 years old, and I was born into a world that has become desensitized to gun violence. My generation has grown up hearing about shooting after shooting on the news, and as a child, I rarely even thought about these tragedies. They felt like a normal occurrence, and they were sad, but they felt distant from my life and from real life. I was only 11 when 26 people were killed in Newtown. I vividly remember the first lockdown drill we had within a few months after. I had never really been scared by lockdown drills before then, because they didn't really feel like a big deal, nobody took them very seriously. But that was the first lockdown drill where I really felt scared, because I remember seeing my 5th grade teacher crying at the sight of her class, leaning against the wall behind the bookcase. But then I moved on, and the fear of a school shooter was just something I grew up with at the back of my mind. It wasn't until a few years ago that I even became aware of the full scope of gun violence in our country. I heard about mass shootings because that's what the news covered and what my parents talked about. Every one of these deaths is equally tragic, yet there's a huge lack of attention to city gun violence. When I was in DC with Moms Demand Action, Students Demand Action, and the Everytown Survivor Network for Gun Sense University, I got to hear a group of students from Baltimore speak about their experiences with gun violence. One of them talked about how common it was for them to hear gunshots, how it would have been strange for them not to hear gunshots every single day. This type of existence is so foreign to me, yet so common for too many Americans. I know that I will never be fully capable of understanding this deadly epidemic that is killing so many people in cities across the US because I've never lived it. But I refuse to ignore it, and we need to make it impossible for our nation to ignore as well. Every day that passes, Every day that passes, 100 Americans are shot and killed and hundreds more are wounded. It's not just that. Each of these people have family, friends, and communities that are also being devastated. After the shooting in Parkland last year, young people spoke up against gun violence. We marched and we rallied, and since then we have not backed down. We have to fight not just for Gilroy, El Paso, or Dayton, but for all 100 of those Americans dying of gun violence every day. It is time for us to honor all of these victims with real action, and that means stronger gun sense legislation that will protect every one of us. No one should have to live their lives in fear of being shot. We aren't going to be able to end gun violence overnight, but we need to start somewhere. As we all know, the House of Representatives has already passed a bill to require universal background checks. Over 90% of Americans support this legislation, and now it is time for the Senate to act. It is time for the Senate to call this bill to vote and pass this life-saving legislation. In my lifetime, I have seen far too many shootings and far too little action. This needs to change. Congress needs to recognize that gun violence is a public health crisis. While we are lucky in Connecticut to have gun sense champions as our senators, so far the Senate has failed to take action, and this cannot go on. It is the job of our legislators to keep us safe, and they need to start doing their jobs or we are going to vote them out. I am going to be 18 in just a few months, which means I'll be voting in the next election and everyone after that. I can tell you right now that I'll be voting for candidates I know will address the issue of gun violence. I am not alone in this. My generation is sick and tired of living with the fear that our loved ones could be next. We are done waiting for Congress to take this issue seriously. If legislators are not going to take action, we will replace them with people who will. Thank you for having me here today. I'm so proud to be fighting alongside such an incredible group of people. You all inspire and empower me, and I know that if anyone can win this fight, it's us. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you all for being here. Now it's time to hear your voices. It's hot and we're tired. We're tired of waiting. We're tired of asking. We are tired of being mad, especially when we know there are common sense solutions. We've heard enough, we've had enough, and we demand action. So, if you are angry, frustrated, heartbroken, let me hear you say, enough! Enough! If you know we can do more to prevent the everyday gun violence impacting communities of color, then tell our lawmakers, enough! Enough! If you demand our senators take action to address the alarming rates of gun suicide, let me hear you say, enough! Enough! If you're tired of your children having to endure lockdown drills in their schools, then tell lawmakers, enough! Enough! If you are tired of black and brown people dying on the streets in our communities, then tell lawmakers, enough! If you want to disarm hate, which is attacking people of faith and our LGBTQ neighbors, then tell our senators, enough! If you are tired of working harder than your lawmakers to prevent gun violence, then tell them, enough! If you are pledging to do everything in your power to end gun violence, tell me, enough! Enough! If you are going to use your voice and your vote to ensure Congress takes action, tell Congress, enough! We will not stand idly by while 100 people are shot and killed in this country on a daily basis. We will not stand by while the nation only pays attention to incidents of gun violence when the toll of death is so high it's unbearable. We know the impact of every life taken is unbearable. 100 lives aren't in the news every day. Death by gun suicide is overlooked. City gun violence is overshadowed. But we are here today together to say enough to all gun violence in all forms. We have had enough, and we demand that Congress change our laws, or we will change Congress! Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. That was Veronica Canalsis, one of our awesome leads at Moms Demand Action.
Enough is enough! 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 Enough is enough!
Thank you. So this concludes our rally today, but before you go, I want to thank you all so much for coming and publicly showing the power of this movement. Look around. We are being heard. Thanks to all our speakers and to all of our gun sense legislators who are here today. And if you're a legislator, an elected official, will you raise your hands now so your constituents can find you? We have Trayvon Diaz, Kayla Brasco, Robin Porter, Matt Blumenthal, and others. Please come up and raise your hands so your constituents know who you are.
Let us know you're here! Let us know you're here!
Thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers. They're not enough. We need votes and laws. So what is the next thing you all can do? I'm gonna suggest 3 things you all can do. The first one is #RecessRally. Post all your pictures on social media with that hashtag. #RecessRally, as we're doing today. Also, please text the word checks, CHECKS, as in background checks, to the number 64433. And tell your families in red states to do the same, because what that will do is automatically connect you to your state senator's office. And all you have to do is leave that message. We want criminal background checks now. Yay! And the last thing, finally, extra credit. If you want to get involved with our awesome team, text the word commit. Commit to 64433. You can also text the word students, if you're a student, to 64433, and we'll get in contact with you. Let us know how you want to be involved, what you want to do to continue to help us. And thank you all so much. This concludes our rally, but we're going to get a group photo. If you don't mind just like waving your signs and jumping up and down for our group photo, we're going to have our photographers come up and get that. And really, that is everything. We are so grateful for your presence here today. Thanks to everyone.